insight into all of this. And so let's get started. But before we turn it over to our panelists and before we jump in, I want to maybe start off with just some quick poll questions just to kind of get a sense of where folks are at. And so I'm going to launch these polls if you just give me 1 second, and feel free to answer. So tell us, what year you are right now. Okay, 2022 is clearly leading the way. That's awesome. I'm just looking at the chat here. A lot of Keenan Flagler, a lot of Stern, some UCLA, some Fuqua. All right, this is great. Okay, awesome. So it looks like mostly 2022. Let me just share this with you. Perfect. All right, so it looks like the majority of you are in 2022. All right, we got another quick poll. Let me go grab it real quick. Okay, so here's the money question. If you had to choose one of these today, what is it going to be? Product marketing or product management? All right, let's see what we got here. Okay, so survey says we're leaning a little bit towards product management. Okay, that's great. All right, last question, and then we'll jump right in. Here we go. For today, what are you most interested in learning? You got the role and day-to-day responsibilities, career progression as a PM and PMM, interview prep advice, or personal experiences from Joe and Lillian. Give it a little bit, almost there. Okay. And the results are day-to-day. All right. Cool. Well, that helps and gives me a good sense of where folks are at. So let's just go ahead. Let's go ahead and jump in. And so I want to start maybe with some introductions. So I'm going to turn it over to Jovanna and Lillian. And so if you just want to start with just who you are and maybe kind of where you went to school and then what you're doing now, and that will be a good starting point. So Jovanna, you want to kick us off?
Sure, yeah. Hey guys, I'm Joe. So I went to UCLA Anderson, class of 2016. Prior to Anderson, I was at Deloitte Consulting for 4 years, and then went back to school, decided I wanted to pivot into product. I worked at Apple over the summer, specifically within retail. So I found sort of my sweet spot at the intersection of retail and tech. And I joined Apple right out of school, and I was there for about 3 years doing product. I was the product lead for the Apple Store app, which is Apple's e-commerce app. And then I sort of fell into product marketing a little bit by accident, but my next role after Apple was product marketing at Rent the Runway, and I'm currently a director of product marketing and customer strategy focused on growth and our resale offering.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro. Lillian, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lillian. Nice to meet you all. Jovanna and I actually overlapped when we were at Deloitte a long time ago. So I was at Deloitte, started there in 2010 out of undergrad. I was there for about 3 years working in tech consulting. And then after Deloitte, I went to Columbia to get my MBA. While I was there, I was really interested in entrepreneurship. So I started my own e-commerce company around fast fashion jewelry. After graduating CBS in 2015, I returned to Deloitte since they had a sponsorship program and I wanted them to pay for my tuition. So I went back to Deloitte for another couple of years. I was part of Deloitte Digital, where I helped a lot of clients build apps and build new websites. After Deloitte, I went over to Snapchat and I was a product marketing manager where I was responsible for launching a lot of their local advertising products. I was at Snap for about 2 years shortly after their IPO, and I am now director of product at a private membership app called Raya in LA.
Awesome. So some really cool companies for both Joe and for Lillian. And cat's out of the bag. I also was at Deloitte, and so that's how I know all of us. So all good roads lead to Deloitte and from Deloitte. All right, so let's maybe just jump in. I guess Jovanna, I'm going to start with you. So right now you talked about director of product marketing for Rent the Runway. Love to know, what does that look like for you right now? And by the way, congratulations on your promotion. So everyone say congrats to Joe for the recent promotion. But tell us what that role looks like for you, just in terms of doing product marketing for a consumer-facing company.
Yeah. So I focus on like two parts of our business right now. And the way we're actually a very, very lean team at Rent the Runway. We're about 3 product marketers total. Me and my immediate counterpart, she focuses on the membership experience. So everything related to our subscribers and their experience once they become subscribers. And I focus on growth. So all of the up until they convert and become a paying member, I think about that whole experience, everything from the acquisition funnel, how we position our product to them, and how we basically just attract them to Rent the Runway. And then once they're there, how we convince them to sign up with us. And then I'm most recently focusing on a new part of our business, which is resale. We just announced it in the Wall Street Journal last week, which was coupled with the launch of resale for our members. And so what that looks like for me, because it's such a new part of the business, and we think of it as really like our second founding moment. I've been really focused on everything, primarily right now, a lot of like the research, insights, and strategy. So we know we want to go into resale, and there's still like so much to learn about who that resale customer is, how we position Rent the Runway resale to them, how we acquire this customer, and how we just like create the best resale experience. So I'm really deep in strategy and like research and insights right now, specifically.
That's great. And just as a follow-up to that, I'm assuming this is this is a pretty big launch here. And so as a product marketer, what kind of was your role, in that actual launch itself? And maybe even how did you end up doing that? Assuming you worked with a product lead or a product manager of some sort, like how did that relationship kind of work?
Yeah. So me and my product manager are like Batman and Robin. We're like total partners and everything, which is awesome. She's absolutely wonderful. But like, if I think back to like several months ago, we decided this is a space we want to enter. We had a lot of like initial data and signals that would suggest that this is like a space to go into. So the very first step was just like validating that this is something our customers would want. And that was just like a ton of customer research initially. So it was just initial, like we put together a number of hypotheses, and then it was just going out and validating these hypotheses with like competitive and market research, as well as like customer research. And then once we validated this as a concept, I worked with our product manager on really like establishing what our product vision is and what that customer, like what the customer job to be done is of this new offering. And then I'll partner with her on just like the roadmap overall. So there are so many different directions you can go. There are a lot of different features you could launch as part of, launching a new category or a new way to transact, like just being able to buy instead of rent. And so we kind of always like take the insights and the data that we see. It's like very data driven, very consumer insights driven. And we just partner on the roadmap, like really trying to think through what's most impactful, what's going to help us meet our business goals, and what our customers want most. And then I partner with like UX team then on like design. So we decide, XYZ features we're going to launch with. Then I work with like UX and our design team to think through like what the customer and like user experience should be in the actual product. And then the last part, or not last, but it's kind of second to last part, is like, then I help put together a go-to-market strategy. So now we know what we're building. We know how it's going to come to life. How do we market this to customers and get them excited about it? How do we talk about this externally, like in press and things like that? So I do kind of a lot of like the research and strategy there and figure out, exactly how to position our new offering. And then the last part is really like product reflection. So this product is out in the world. We have a learning plan, and we need to like measure, were we successful in the eyes of our customer? Were we successful from a business perspective? That's really like, I think a high level, like end to end, taking a product from like ideation to all the way to like to market, and then through learning.
Great. Thanks for breaking that down. Lillian, I want to go over to you. So, similar kind of question, walk us through what your role is right now. And is in addition to that, we were just talking earlier, it sounds like you're coming up on a product launch. So maybe talk a little bit about what that's like.
Sure. So my role right now as director of product, it's a little bit different when you're at a startup, right? Because when you're at a larger company, typically a product manager will have like PMMs to also actually run the launch and help with a lot of the research and all of that. But generally, if you're at a much smaller company, you don't have a PMM role yet, right? Like there's not enough products to be launched where you want to carve out another headcount for that. So very oftentimes when you're at a small company as a PM or like anyone who works in product, you pretty much have to do it all. You have to do like both jobs essentially. And so for us, for myself, like we have actually a pretty big launch coming up over the next couple of days. And so like everything from end to end, let's say, for instance, when we're building a new feature, I'll do a lot of the competitive research to figure out what kind of features do our competitors have? How much are they charging? What does behavior look like? What does the market reception look like? And then we'll actually start working with design team and also with our engineering team to carve out like technical feasibility and then figuring out like what does the MVP, like first release, second release, et cetera, look like, right? On top of that, from a product management perspective, not only are you carving out the requirements for your feature and finalizing the design for your feature, you're also figuring out like what are your success metrics, right? So for instance, figuring out, okay, what are some key metrics I want to look at? What are some goals I want to drive towards? Not only are you looking at first primary KPIs for your feature exactly, but you also want to look at secondary or any downstream KPIs where your product might influence overall app core KPIs. So there's a lot of different things to look at, right? And that's only just like the product side. So once you have all of the specs and all of those things written, everything's finalized with engineering, then you're looking at go-to-market. So go-to-market, oftentimes, it's very much strategic, like Jovanna was talking about, but you're also focusing a lot on a lot of the tactical work, right? Because when you're launching, for us, for instance, we only do phased rollouts just because we're a cautionary measure. It's just easier to do smaller cohorts, measure success, and if we feel comfortable, then we'll launch to larger groups of folks, right? So for the go-to-market perspective, it's making sure all your different cohorts are making sense, all your properties are correct, a lot of the more tactical stuff, everything to make sure on the server side, everything's ready, as well as the client side, everything's ready, and building together an overall go-to-market strategy, right? And for a lot of larger companies, like let's say when I was at Snapchat and I was doing a go-to-market strategy, I would very often have to make sure all the different folks related to downstream operations are all aware of the product launch, right? So for instance, like at Snap, for example, when I was a product marketing manager, I would have to make sure our release and our ops teams were aware of the launch, make sure our press team was ready, make sure I had my press pitches ready as well, and make sure all of our sales teams were ready, just basically making sure like every single little part of the launch is ready to go. So in case anyone has any questions, everyone knows exactly where to turn. So obviously it's like very much smaller at Raya since we are a smaller company, but it's still like the level of detail operationally that you still have to manage.
Yeah, thank you for walking through that. And actually, I would love to kind of go further with you in terms of comparing what you're doing now with your time at Snap, right? When you were more on the product marketing side. And so I'm just curious, what kind of changed, when you made the switch, not only from being, at Snap when you were more on product marketing and a little bit more mature of a company to now being at Raya, where not only are you in product management, but you're in a company that's a little bit more earlier stage in the process.
Yeah, so definitely pretty different just because at Snapchat, my role was in B2B, right? Because at Snap, just kind of give you guys an overview. So Snap, there's B2C, like there's consumer products. So for example, anything that's all about driving user engagement, for instance, like having basic lenses or different filters or being able to like send Bitmojis. Those are examples of consumer products, right? And then on the other side, the money-making side, it's typically monetization product, which is all B2B products, right? And that basically includes anything touching advertisers or any way that Snapchat is marketing to businesses to bring in revenue. And so that's where product marketing was a major role for Snap, just because like product managers, they have to deal with writing out all the specs, like all the different things I talked to you guys about earlier. But you very often, a product manager needs to partner with a PMM who basically understands the business line across multiple features and understands the marketplace for that. Right. And so as a product marketing manager at Snap, I oftentimes would work with 3 to 5 different PMs at a time, basically making sure all their launches made sense, making sure all the launches came out with a really good storyline, a good narrative. And very oftentimes, like I was mentioning before, I would actually have to write a press pitch with our PR team to make sure the product got maximum press. And then further on down the line, like depending on the type of product, your job as a PMM is basically to drive adoption for that product, right? So very oftentimes I'll take a look to see like what are some upcoming webinars around my business line, or what are some like speaker opportunities I could go to attend and talk to more people about the new products I'm launching. So very much like an external facing role, whereas a PM role at Snap was more internal facing.
Great. Thank you for breaking that down. And Joe, I want to go back to you as well. So kind of on the similar vein of kind of comparing and contrasting, can you talk a little bit about what that transition was like for you in terms of, being in product management at Apple and then making the transition to Rent the Runway and, being in product marketing? What was like the delta, or how did your day-to-day life change?
Yeah, good question. I think first and foremost, like the scale of companies obviously is very, very different. And then, doing product at Apple was launching features to like 30 countries in 28 different languages, which just meant we had like fewer releases a year, because especially being at a company it's so rooted in design, and anything we put out into the world was like in the news and in blogs within like 10 minutes. So like the margin of error was like didn't exist. So you had to launch perfectly. And that's just so different than going to a company that like only operates in the US, is like much smaller, works, just moves much quicker. And then like, it's kind of okay if like things don't go well, or if something isn't like perfect at launch, because we are launching MVPs and then continuing to like iterate on them over time. So it was actually a huge shift in like mindset for me. And then, again, like back to like launching in like so many different countries and across in so many different languages and things like that, like, and a product that touches millions of people just meant like the cross-functional effort was like complete, like,
yeah.
Like, over like 50 people would be involved in like one launch, if not more. And so like all the prep that Lillian mentioned in terms of just like getting all the teams like on board and making sure everyone has a good understanding of the product and how it's going to work and all the impacts and things like that. Like that was just a much greater scale. I still do all of those things at Rent the Runway, but it's like a little bit of a smaller scale, and it's kind of nice to be a little bit nimble. We can A/B test, like there's just a lot more flexibility in terms of what you bring to life. There's like a lot more opportunity for learning and like less pressure on like one specific day and launch, because you can continue to like iterate. And again, to like Lillian's point about defining success metrics, we do that. And then if we aren't hitting those success metrics, we like can quickly pivot and launch so we can just continue to iterate on the product until we kind of get to where we want to go. So it's just kind of definitely a different, a complete shift. And in the day-to-day, like things just moved a little bit slower at Apple. At Rent the Runway, it's just like there's never really a chill week. But it definitely feels just like a business and learning, like product management, product marketing boot camp, because what I've learned in almost 2 years feels like, what I think people could pack into like a 5 to 7 year career. So just different considerations if you're thinking like big company versus small company. Learning curves are different and scale is different in terms of what you're launching and the number of people that you're working with.
Yeah, for sure. And on that notion, Joe, just to follow up there, when you were in business school, maybe like this time a couple of years ago, what was your kind of mindset in terms of what you were looking for, and then how you went about to align to making sure you could achieve that, and then eventually land that PM role at Apple?
Yeah, so I going into school knew that I wanted to do product, and so kind of had an opportunity to interview across a number of different companies. I actually took like a product management course off campus because I really wanted to like develop those skills and be able to like set myself apart from, you know, from everyone who is interested in product management, which you guys know is like continues to grow year over year. And so I did some like just external learning and things like that. But ultimately, it kind of came down to, as I was like evaluating different internship options, was deciding between big company and small company. And I wanted to go somewhere that had a lot of like, that was going to have resource where I could like fail comfortably, where I would be supported and just really have an opportunity to learn. And then the other like really major consideration for me was industry. So I think like I knew I wanted to work at the intersection of tech and retail. So that was ultimately like how I, you know, companies that I gravitated towards and how I made that decision. But I always kind of tell people to like narrow down the kind of size of company you want. There's like pros and cons to the different sizes. The roles look different at different size companies. And then, you know, do you have an industry in mind that is really important to you that you want to work in? Or are you just like fully, you know, like really gunning for a product role, but it doesn't matter what industry? I think those are like all things that I would take into consideration. For me, it was like product, retail, and I wanted to work at a big company.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Lillian, going back to you for a second, and something that you and I have talked about before is just kind of, you know, figuring out like product marketing or product management. And the nice thing about both of you is that both of you worked in both, but I'm just curious from your perspective, just how did you kind of figure out which one you actually enjoy more, or like, how did you kind of get to that conclusion of, you know, which is what, or like what makes sense for me? Because I know that is a question that I get a lot. I know it's a question that both of you get a lot. So just would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, sure. So I can only probably speak to B2B product marketing type of roles, which I feel like are pretty popular coming out of business school, right? So I would say like working in product marketing, it's more of asking yourself, do you want to spend most of your time with sales and marketing folks, or do you want to spend most of your time with engineers and designers, which would be more product managing? So for myself, you know, I dabbled a bit in product marketing. I kind of fell into the role, to be honest. The role was originally product strategy, but then they basically renamed and reshuffled the org into product marketing. But it's more like if you are someone who loves to be externally facing and someone who loves to be on stage, giving all these big talks, basically like trying to evangelize for your product, then maybe product marketing is a role that works for you. But if you really enjoy like nitty gritty problem solving, figuring out requirements, like working with designers creatively to figure out how to build the best kind of products and working really heavily in data, then probably product management is the role for you. And so for myself, that's actually my preference, because like I love geeking out over data and like looking at requirements and working with engineers. For me, it's a lot more fun and it's a lot more of my passion.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And on that note, and just to drill down a little bit, can you talk a little bit about kind of working with engineering teams, right? Because now, in terms of what your role is now, you do, do that quite a bit. And I do, knowing your background in consulting, I can definitely see the connection and how that kind of comes to light. But for those people out there who are interested in product management, that certainly is a reality of that role. So could you maybe just talk a little bit about, what that looks like for you, and, how you've relied on your past experiences to handle those responsibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I was pretty lucky having worked in tech consulting at Deloitte. Part of my job very often was going to different client sites and helping to implement best practices. So for instance, trying to like basically teach clients like how does PMing work, right? Like how does engineering work? How do you do the best practices for software development? Like helping them understand basics, because oftentimes like clients are product owners, but most of them have never built software before, right? Like that's why they hired Deloitte in the first place. And so for myself, being able to go to the startup that I work at right now, helping them kind of to establish a lot of the operations and set up best practices early. That way they have a very organized and streamlined engineering process, which therefore makes it so much easier for us to build really good products, right? So helping folks understand, like how the overall product development lifecycle looks like. We'll always have product a sprint ahead of the server team, and then we'll have the server team a sprint ahead of the client team, and basically staggering all of the work and staggering all of the dependencies to help us meet our roadmap.
Great. No, thank you for breaking that down. And Joe, I want to give it over to you because I know we've talked a little bit about this before. But for you, how do you think about kind of the differences between product marketing and product management? And for anyone out there who's still trying to figure that out, like what kind of is your advice or your guidance on that topic?
Yeah. So actually, I have a completely different experience than Lynn because I've been primarily in B2C, and so I think like the teams you work with are different, and just like I think just like how your time is split for sure. Like I've not had to be on stage as often as you have, and I don't know that I would enjoy that. Yeah, so I fell into product marketing coming out of product management, and I think like when I think of the whole software development lifecycle, there's like the initial discovery phase where you're just trying to like glean insights, try to validate some of your hypotheses, and like decide on what to build. And I'm like energized and interested in that because it's like it's usually a big ambiguous problem. You're having to like think really critically to try to break down that problem and problem solve into like how you might address that problem. And so in my product marketing role now, I get to work on that. I get to work with designers. I'd say like of the entire life cycle, the only part that I don't do is the managing engineers part. But I'm like really involved in every step leading up to actual launches and then post launches. So for me, it was like all the things that I really enjoyed about product, which was more like the strategy and the vision and like trying to figure out exactly what we're going to build. And I actually also geek out on like the data and all that, which is why growth is like perfect for me. So like, yeah. I also encourage people to think about those two things. There's like just like engagement, and you can be working on products that are really tied to just like, my coworker who works on membership. It's really around that engagement once we've already converted someone. But like, I love thinking about growth because it is so deeply analytical. There's a lot of experimentation and things like that. And I get to do that as a product marketer. But I think to your question about like, the differences or how do you decide between the two, I think size of company plays a big role in the different roles and responsibilities of the role. A lot of large companies, there's specific product marketers focused on like just research. And then there's a product marketer who's like potentially just focused on like go-to-market strategy. I don't think I would want to do just one part. I kind of like that I get to touch like a lot of different things. So for me, doing product marketing at a smaller company sort of aligns with my just like my interests and kind of how I want to spend my days.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I think the one thing I'm hearing from both of you does kind of come back to this idea of either where do you want to who or where do you want to spend your time, right? Like who do you want to work with, or what do you want to focus on? And so, and quite frankly, many of the things, as you both have alluded to, are the actual, whatever the deliverable is or whatever the milestone is, the PM and the PMM have to work on it together in some capacity. It's just in some cases it's being led by the PMM or it's led by the PM, or in some cases the PMM is just checking it, whereas like the PM is the one who's leading it. And so in those types of things, it's less about do you want to do this or not, and more about like how much effort you're going to be putting into this particular thing. And certainly that will, as you both alluded to, this will change and differ a little bit company to company based off a lot of different criteria and the like. So this is really great. I want to give our panelists a minute to catch their breath. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip back over to just another question, just to kind of get some folks out there to participate a little bit. But what I would love to know is from all of you, if you could put out there just put in the chat, what's something you're still trying to understand, either about product marketing or product management, and just throw it in the chat. But just what is something that you're still trying to understand about product marketing or product management? And feel free to just throw it in the chat. Give our panelists a minute to catch their breath. Okay, so we already got a couple good questions in here. We'll give it a little bit more until we take a crack at some of these. Okay, let's everyone keep putting your questions in, and we're going to start and tackle some of these. So one thing that's coming up is this idea around KPIs, right? And it sounds like collectively we've all covered both B2B and B2C. So perhaps maybe we can take take a stab, fully knowing that it's going to differ company to company. But Joe, maybe you want to start just in terms of B2C, in terms of like some of the KPIs. And maybe even use this launch as an example of like a starting point for like how you think about that.
Yeah, good question. I'm like trying to think. I was like literally just working on this learning plan today. So last Monday we launched the ability for members to purchase items without having to rent them first. So they always previously would like rent items. Once it came home, they could decide to buy it. But now, like when you're browsing in the experience, you can choose to buy or rent. So that's just kind of like an overview of the experience. So I mean, our KPIs are like average number of items purchased per subscriber. We want like a double-digit % lift on that. We also, for the first time, are letting paused members purchase items. We also have like KPIs for that, like average number of units purchased per paused subscriber. And then we think like maybe it'll increase acquisition overall because this is like a new feature. So we'll monitor acquisition. We'll look at specific, we might test different emails where we talk about this feature and where we don't, and see like, is there a lift in acquisition there? So I'd say those are like our North Star metrics for that launch. And then we have like specific go-to-market metrics, just looking at like overall email engagement, new signups, conversion directly from different emails. And then the third thing I'll just look at is just like customer sentiment overall, like on social channels through our CX team, and just understand like what the general like reaction is to that launch.
Great, thanks for that. Lillian, do you want to take a stab at that, either from, in your role now at Raya or just even from your time at Snap?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about it from a product perspective. So typically before you start scoping out the full product, you should know what your success metrics should kind of be like, because anytime you're building out a feature, it would make sense to be like, cool, I want to build this feature so I can do XXX, right? Or whatever it may be, right? So like maybe let's say like any feature you build ideally should be able to solve a problem that the users have or solve a problem the users don't know they have yet, right? So for example, I can just talk really quickly about like a monetization product that I built at Raya, for example. So very oftentimes, like you're going to have very limited engineering resources. And so when it comes time for the product team to prioritize which product should be built, the KPIs are a major factor, right? So let's say, for instance, when you're creating like a product roadmap, you're going to have all your features listed out. You're going to have the estimated impact. You're going to say like, okay, cool, for this product, we're expecting a lift in so-and-so metrics, et cetera. And then from that, you can basically help prioritize which products you want to kind of do a deep dive and do more speccing on. So examples of some like monetization KPIs. So for instance, anytime you're doing an iOS app, right, you're going to have like, very oftentimes you'll have your subscription model type of revenue, and you're also going to have in-app consumables, which are a lot of the ad hoc purchases you guys see. Very, very popular in dating apps or in gaming apps, right? So when you're looking at metrics around those, you're going to look at like consumable revenue per user, right? Or like subscription revenue per user, overall revenue per user. Those are very common revenue related. If you're launching a consumer type of app, very oftentimes you're thinking about engagement metrics, right? So maybe perhaps this feature is supposed to boost app opens, right? Especially if you're like sending push notifications, if you're like boosting member to member engagement. So then you're going to look at, total app opens per user. Some of your KPIs could be like, was there a lift in total time spent on app per user or total matches made per user, things like that. So every single feature has a different set of KPIs, but it's very important to identify your primary KPIs as well as the secondary KPIs, kind of like the downstream KPIs that can impact the app.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And I can quickly take it from a B2B enterprise software perspective from a PMM lens. So what's interesting about B2B, particularly within enterprise software, is that typically in an enterprise software sales cycles, there is a buyer, but that buyer will talk to or have to engage with numerous other stakeholders before they make a purchasing decision, right? One of Joe's customers, right? Like they may need to decide for themselves if they want to purchase the subscription or not. If a CIO wants to buy $1 million worth of enterprise software, they need to talk to more than one person, right? Like it's not just something they can just decide on a whim that I'm going to go and do and then make happen. And so from a B2B perspective, we focus a lot in terms of if we think about like the traditional marketing funnel, from a product marketing perspective, a lot of times, we'll be asked to, maybe take a look at a particular aspect of the funnel to figure out how to optimize for it. And so if it's traditionally just thinking about, well, like, how do we get more people into the marketing funnel? We might think about things about, well, if this is a B2B kind of environment, what are in which the ways our customers are engaging with us? Where are they coming to us? And so one example is certainly our website, right? And so we might look at things like, if we put a blog post, or if we put some marketing assets on our website, how many people are engaging with those assets, right? And ideally at the top of the funnel, the assets are a little bit more high level, a little bit more introductory. But the hope is that as people get more interested in it, they'll want to engage more, and so they'll start coming down the funnel, and where your assets are a little bit more in depth, right? And so, for example, an asset that might be more in depth might be like a demo, or like a quick kind of ebook about your particular product. And so one metric that they might track or they might measure against is, if you create a landing page for this great new demo, how many people signed up, right? How many people signed up to view it? And then, from there, it's like, well, now that you have their email address, or now that you have their contact information, you can have someone on the sales team come and call down on it, right? And say, hey, we see you watch this demo. Are you interested in, a further conversation? And then that might go through the actual, marketing funnel itself. And so in that case, we might measure things like, initial people who came into the funnel for us, and then how they progress through the funnel. And so that might amount to how many people signed up on the form? How much did that turn into actual, pipeline, like a dollar amount? Or in other ways, they might ask us to focus a little bit further down in the funnel, right? And so sales might come to us and say, hey, look, like, we have these people who are, they're really warm. They're almost there. Like they're almost there. They're almost going to buy. Is there anything we can do to like convert them? And so we might do like an exec event or some sort, right? Where we invite a whole bunch of, people who are interested in buying, and we bring in some of our experts on the product. And, from that event, can we track how much we've been able to convert from, just people who attended into like actual, closing or signing a deal. And so in that case, we might track like, of the people who attended, how many decided to, say yes, or what's the dollar amount or the size of that deal. So it really can kind of vary. But at the end of the day, like, I think within the B2B realm, a lot of the metrics, you really have to think about what does that funnel look like, and what does the buying cycle look like? And then how can you find something to kind of hook onto, and then figure out how can you optimize for that through different touch points or different channels or different marketing assets. So that's kind of what it looks like from a B2B perspective. Another question that's coming up is just this idea around how technical do you need to be, particularly for the realm of like product management. And so Joe, I'll start with you. Like what's been your experience either for yourself or from what you've seen in terms of like that technical expertise that someone needs in order to be a product manager?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the product that you're working on. And like even within like a company or a product, like what specifically you're working on. Like there is definitely, if you're working on like large scale, like platform projects, it might help to be like more technical. I have found that we're working in more consumer product and B2C overall, like I've come across a lot of PMs, and I think companies are becoming a lot more comfortable with having PMs that do not have a technical background. I don't have a technical background, but I think I think you don't have to have a technical background, but you have to be able to, one, like quickly ramp up and learn things, and be able to like empathize and understand your engineers and work with them. So like I worked on actually some relatively like pretty technical projects at Apple. I worked on like a search redesign that was like leveraging machine learning. And I had to like learn all about that. So I just did like a lot of self-studying and learning, because you don't want to walk in, at least for me, I like didn't want to walk into a room with my engineers and like completely have like no clue what I was talking about. So I would like do all my homework so that I can at least understand kind of like the problems that we were solving for. And like, as things came up, I at least had like working knowledge of certain things. So I don't think you have to have a technical background for many across like, you know, a lot of different companies and product roles, but I do think you have to be naturally curious. You have to be naturally willing to like put in the work and be able to like, to just make you, to help you be able to like partner more effectively with your engineers. So, and then actually, I don't think, when I think at Rent the Runway, specifically on the consumer side, most of our PMs do not have a technical background.
Sure.
So yeah, I've definitely seen it happen.
Lillian, what about you from your experience?
I'm the same, don't have a technical background, but I think what's really important is if you don't have a technical background, you should be able to make up for it by having good knowledge in like software development lifecycle. So if you don't have a technical background, you should definitely kind of get your 101s on like how apps are built, like how servers talk to clients, kind of like the basics. Otherwise, it'll be really hard for the engineering team to want to listen to you, I feel like. So I would say a lot of the really strong PMs I have met in my day have an engineering background. That's definitely a good plus. But if you do come from a consulting or marketing background and you're trying to do PM, I think kind of like the gain you have on the more technical PM types is your ability to be able to persuade and present data in a certain way so you can get products built. So kind of like there's like goods to both sides.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is an interesting question. Be curious to either of you to get your takes on this. Eliza asks, how can you tell if a company is doing product marketing right? It seems like the role varies so much company to company, and in some companies it's more similar to a growth marketing role and it's not seen as strategic. There's probably some context for that question. I don't have it, but like, Joe, you want to take a stab at this first? You know, maybe start with that first kind of notion. How do you tell if a company is doing PMM right?
Yeah, I don't know about if they do it right, because I think there's like a lot of different ways of doing it. But I do think that like in the, sounds like how I kind of read this was like you want to understand, it sounds like the role varies. And so how do you find out, like, and how do you get a sense for like what you're getting yourself into if you're looking for a PMM role? And I would say like, I've thought about this a lot because I've thought about like, if I leave Rent the Runway, like I love the way product marketing is set up at Rent the Runway, and I really love my role at Rent the Runway. And I give this advice to people, like product marketing aside, but like you should try on a job like you would, like in the same way that they're interviewing you, like you should be interviewing them. If I was to be going into, if I was to be interviewing at another company for a product marketing role, I would just ask a lot of questions, and I would ask to talk to a lot of the different who would be like my cross-functional partners. So I would talk to a PM and I would ask them like how they partner with product marketing historically, what they wish, like what they wish they could have more help on from a product marketing perspective, because that's like really your big partner. I would talk to the marketing team and understand like how much, really what the product marketing role is in terms of helping them come up with like a marketing strategy. Do they, you know, have they ever had that before? Like, do they want that? Who's been doing it historically? And like, what have their strengths been? I would just really try to unpack like what people find most valuable in the role. And I think you'll quickly find out if like all you hear from people is like, oh, like our PMs are so great at like marketing products. And like, no one ever mentions that they're even involved in like the development, like the software development lifecycle, or in, you know, in the roadmap and things like that. And like, you'll quickly know that like, that's probably a product marketer that's more focused on go to market. And like, that's okay. It just like might not be for you. I would also encourage like it's really helpful to understand like speaking to business, like any of the key like business leaders at the company. So like one of my key cross-functional partners is our like head of revenue. And so we partner really closely on identifying just like business opportunities overall and then validating them. And if you are not connecting with anyone on the business side before things are decided, that also is like kind of a signal into the involvement at the strategic and like roadmap part.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Lillian, anything you want to add from your perspective on that question, just in terms of how do you tell?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was really great. Covered like most of the stuff I was thinking about saying. One thing I would add too is like every company does it very differently. Like just talking about like the background of PM versus PMM. PMM itself is a relatively newer career path. So a lot of companies are like, oh my God, that's a super cool title. We should definitely have it. But a lot of companies haven't figured out like what is the difference between PMM versus consumer marketing or business marketing, right? So like Joe was saying, it's really great if you can ask the different stakeholders what exactly was the PMM's role and what their impact was. Another thing you could do is, if you can, figure out the team's like org structure, right? So you can kind of have an idea of how powerful a PMM's role or how influential the role could be. So just for example, right, at Snap, PMM actually rolls under product. It doesn't roll under marketing. And so that's very telling, because then you can tell, okay, if they're rolling under product, they're usually like in a lot of the very deep product meetings. And so they're probably really close to product, and therefore they're likely to have more influence on a product roadmap. Versus, I believe, I mean, I'm not sure if this is correct or not, but from what I've heard, like Facebook, PMM actually has their own entire org, right? It's separate from marketing and it's separate from PM. So you can kind of have an idea of like how these different players interact. And a lot of times, like the reason why it's really important to talk to your counterparts is a lot of companies, they have some, let's say like some issues, or like they have difficulty with overlap between product and marketing. And so you really want to like hear about how that stuff works, like how the strategy handoff works, who does operationally what kinds of things, because like oftentimes you don't want to step on marketing's toes, and like you want to make sure that you're stepping into a role where it's pretty clear what your influence should be.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that, to Lillian's point, is that because product marketing is so new and because it is such a cross-functional role, I do think one of the challenges that sometimes happens is that when you're in a cross-functional role where you don't own that necessarily own the number or the particular KPI, it can get really easy to get lost in the shuffle, or it can be really hard sometimes to quantify your impact. And so I do think to whoever started asking about the KPI questions to start, I think that's always a great place to start, because when you start asking those questions, if there isn't an answer, well, that's a telling sign. But in addition to that, depending on what the answer is, will also be telling in terms of what that particular product marketing team is being asked to optimize for. And then the other point that I think both of you made is to get a better understanding of who is the product marketing team spending the most amount of time with, right? Is it, are they spending a lot of time with a product manager because they are doing those research, that strategy, and that insights? Are they spending a lot of time with the go-to-market team and the sales team because that's really where they're focused on in terms of being able to drive that continuous kind of demand as well as adoption? And so I do think though that it's not necessarily like what's better or what's worse. I think a lot of it also can be too, particularly for your first job, out of business school, is like what makes sense for what your interests, are. Like I think there are, and also I think, what you can kind of grow into as well, because I do, the nice thing sometimes about being in a role that is a little ill-defined at times is that if you can prove that you can add value, it does give you an opportunity to maybe shape a little bit of the direction that, you want to go in. So that's what I would say to that. One other question, and this has come up a couple of times now, any recommendations? And Joe, maybe I'll start with you because you did this in business school, I presume. The question's around resources you recommend to get up to speed to prepare you better for product management if you don't have a tech background.
Yeah, I would say, so I say first and foremost, my advice is like, do not try to make up for not having a technical background by just like studying the tech part of product. I think your time could be spent much more on other things that are going to make you a much more effective PM. So I think Lillian touched on like just understand the software development lifecycle overall. I think there's like, I honestly just did a ton of like Google searching and things like that, but what actually was more important for me when I was trying to prep for a role in product was I wanted to really understand like how do you even decide on what to build, what that process is like. I did want to focus a little bit more on like design. That was something I like was important for me from like a PM skill. I wanted to like be better at that and be able to like engage with designers and be like a little bit more proficient in design. And I think that was because Apple's very design focused. And so I did some like online classes. I like learned Sketch and like things like that, just so like I could throw together wireframes if I wanted and things like that. But I would say some of the best resources that were most helpful for me are like Louis Seelan's case interview books for product, just because he like breaks down a lot of product problems and there's like a lot of frameworks in there. So that'll help you with interviewing, but I actually think it helps you in thinking about like just how to approach problems overall from a product perspective. Decode and Conquer is also like one of my favorite books for the same reasons, like a lot of really great, yeah, and I'll just put it in the chat. I kind of touch on those in that podcast as well. But there are some just really great case interview books, and just do a lot of case interview exercises, I would say. I think it just helps to get you in that mindset. And then, yeah, figure out if you want to be more of a business focused PM, a design focused PM, or like a tech focused PM, more technical PM. And then like, I would say kind of like focus on one of those areas and building competency in like one of those. But I don't think it's helpful to try to do everything or like ramp up on technical skills if that's not something that you want to do.
Give this one to Lillian. Is it preferred to have PM experience to become a PMM?
I think it's helpful, but you don't need to. And the reason why I say it's helpful is because, like, let's say you did have PM experience and you're a PMM, it's much easier for you to speak the same language as the PMs you're working with, right? Very oftentimes, like PMMs who have never built products before, they'll ask the PMs like a lot of questions that don't really make sense, or they'll like push for products that really don't have like the best ROI, or it just doesn't make sense to build, right? And so like being able to speak their language is pretty important, but not necessary.
Great. No, I think that's right. One skill that comes up a lot, both for product marketers as well as product managers, is this idea about influence. And in some cases, it's often titled influence without formal authority. And one of the ways that you can do that and do that well as both a product marketer or a product manager is to being able to speak the language of your stakeholders. So if you have PM experience and you have experience working with PMMs, that experience is going to be valuable if you were put into that role as a PM. So just as I would like to think that Lillian and Joe, part of the reason why they're good at what they do now is because they have the experience of the former role and the former stakeholder, or the stakeholder they have now is the former role that they once had. So I do think it is, in fact, pretty valuable. All right. Well, I think, let me just see if there's any other questions. I think that's pretty much all we have. And so I know we're wrapping up on time. First and foremost, I want to give a shout out to both Joe and Lillian. Thank you so much for joining today and for sharing a little bit more about your experiences both within product marketing and product management. And so I guess, where do we go from here? If you want some more resources, I put both of my interviews with Joe and Lillian in the chat. Feel free to check them out. But if you're looking for other resources that are out there on the MBA School website, there's a corner for both product marketing and product management. You can check that out. If you're looking for my PMM guide, you can go to free resources. And if you have any ideas for the next event, email me and let me know. But other than that, thanks everyone for joining on a Monday. Have a great rest of your week. And thank you again, Lillian and Joe.
Thanks. You guys literally don't need anything else except Al's resources. So just go to MBA Schooled and do exactly what he tells you to do.
Awesome.
Thanks, Al.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.